Hey, how's it going everybody? List of Legends here, hope you're all having an amazing day, and if you couldn't tell by the title and thumbnail, we're going to be talking about Total Drama Island versus Total Drama World Tour. Now this versus battle is really tricky, because we're essentially talking about the best of the best. When people often talk about their favorite season of Total Drama, more oftentimes than not, it's going to be either Island or World Tour. You could maybe make a case for Action, but in all honesty, I just view it as the awkward middle child between the two seasons. Yeah, Revenge of the Island wasn't bad or anything, but it's nowhere near as good, and that is a fact. Now, I don't think I really need to convince anyone why All Stars or Pahkitew isn't much of a contender. If anything, it's depicted as the worst season, and I honestly can make a whole other video discussing which half of the season is the worst. I say half, because for some odd reason, they chose to have All Stars the first half, with Pahkitew Island being the back half. I don't understand why Pahkitew just wasn't called Season 6, but I digress. So before we dive into everything, I wanted to briefly talk about the new Total Drama Island revival that is rapidly approaching with quite a few promos and teasers that have recently dropped, and the big thing everyone is talking about is the new voice of Chris McClane, now voiced by Terry McGurran. Now of course this made a lot of people pretty mad, but from what I'm hearing, I think the Total Drama team made the right decision here. I'm not going to go into any detail whether he got fired or not, he's obviously been replaced, so what's done is done. It's definitely going to be a huge adjustment, no doubt about it. All I can say is just based off what we've heard so far, I think Terry is doing a solid job, and it's not like they're getting some random person to do the role. Terry is the same guy who voiced Dawn from The Ridonkulous Race, so it's not like he's new to the franchise or anything. In the end, the revival is very close to debuting in English. I couldn't imagine it taking any longer than the end of summer at the absolute latest. For sure, I'll be covering the revival when it comes out, so no worries on that front. If you want to see more content like this in the future, be sure to click that like and subscribe button, I greatly appreciate it. Without further options, let's begin. So first things first, what I'm going to do here is break down what each season has to offer and eventually come to the conclusion on what season does what best. Taking a look at Island, its whole thing is it takes place on an island, with the setting being it's a summer camp, they sleep in cabins, make really weird arts and crafts and yada yada. So the setting is pretty much concrete and consistent here. Another thing Island has is obviously the complete first generation cast at its disposal. Not to say that World Tour doesn't have this, but there are a few notable characters that don't compete, such as Beth, Eva, Jeff, Justin, Katie, Sadie, and Trent. The next thing Island has is a much more toned down Chris, and what I mean by that is he is a lot more down to earth and actually gets involved with the contestants. An example being when Jeff gets pummeled by Hale, he's having a nice chilling conversation with Trent, side by side, acting like true bros if you will. While he wasn't like everyone's best friend or anything, he definitely showed a lot more compassion to the contestants compared to the rest of the series. Let's also not forget the time he literally ran down to the Chow Hall to warn Gwen about the psycho killer on the loose. If that situation were to happen in World Tour, Gwen is getting absolutely slaughtered, no questions asked. Now let's talk about the main antagonist, aka the villain of this season, and that of course is Heather. She's a pretty ruthless, cunning demon to say the least. The amount of feats she managed to accomplish was utterly insane, so to say she had practically everyone wrapped around her thumb wouldn't be too far-fetched. I mean, she literally managed to manipulate Beth and Lindsay to do whatever she said, no matter how absurd it was. She completely turned Gwen and Trent's relationship upside down to the point where it caused everyone to vote Trent off. And if that wasn't enough, she always somehow managed to convince everyone, every single time up until elimination, to vote someone else off instead when facing elimination, even if the reason was like really lame. A couple examples would be when she convinces everyone to vote off Justin after the talent show, despite her literally reading Gwen's diary to the entire world. Then there's the whole cursed tiki doll thing Beth took from the island, so everyone just immediately jumps the shark and votes off Beth. All this pretty much shows that Heather can exploit any weaknesses, no matter how small, and manages to eliminate them. So based off everything, Heather is an absolute monster, and is definitely hands down one of the best villains in the entire series. Finally, let's get into the challenges. So when looking at this category, Island's challenges are a lot more simple, it had more of a relaxed environment, and overall it gave off some really nice vibes. Like there would be a challenge about a game of hide and seek, or a challenge about surviving a horror movie. The challenges here were a lot more tame in my opinion, like everything was a lot more toned down, whether it's a simple walk to the dock of shame, or sneaking into Chef's kitchen, everything felt really genuine, like it actually felt like you were there with the characters, so point blank Island is a pretty good season, and it definitely deserves to be at the top. So now let's start taking a look at Total Drama World Tour. This season takes place all around the world, from New York, to Hawaii, to Paris, they've been literally everywhere. Which makes room for some really creative challenges, such as the Hunt for the Ripper in London, or the Bobsled of Death. You also get most of the first generation cast, as well as a couple of new characters, that being Sierra and Alejandro. One thing that's also new is the added musical bits throughout the show, where Chris literally makes the contestants sing on the fly, without any at all notice, which have made for some pretty banger songs, like This Is How It Ends and We're Gonna Make It. But by far the best part about World Tour in my opinion is the incredible introduction of one of the best villains in the series, that being Alejandro. Unlike Heather, Alejandro manages to use his good looks and charm to manipulate anyone, and I mean anyone, all without letting people know what all he's about, which puts him at a huge advantage. All Alejandro had to do was walk up, be himself, and cause the other team, or members of his own team, to make a mistake or cause a rift, and they'd immediately be silenced and eliminated. An example being when he took off his shirt to keep Bridget warm, and before she could land a kiss on him, Alejandro backed up and she made out with a pole. Then there's manipulating Harold to essentially sacrificing himself, then following that, he then gets Lashana to seize the day, which in turn causes her to beat down Heather to a pulp and make her look so overpowered, so her teammates gave her the boot. That's just absolutely nuts! Overall, that's just a small list of what he's capable of. It's also really nice seeing a rivalry between Heather and Alejandro, which makes for a really good watch. Since Heather's only a small handful that can see through Alejandro, not a lot of people take her seriously since everyone knows what she did in Island. It pretty much gives Heather the role of an underdog, which is executed extremely well. Overall, I think it goes without saying, World Tour is an absolute gem, no doubt about it. Alright, I think I've went over pretty much everything each season has to offer. Now let's get into what season does what best. So when it comes to the setting, I think World Tour has a huge leg up. Reason being, it offers a lot more locations, which makes things a lot more interesting. As for the characters, I know I said World Tour is missing a few notable characters, but in all reality, I don't think this is a huge handicap, since most of the big name characters are still present. Now, one thing Island definitely stomps on is Chris's demeanor. I absolutely love his down-to-earth personality, and it really made the show feel so much more relaxed. Now granted, World Tour doesn't have Chris as insane as he is in Revenge of the Island and so on, but it's still worth pointing out that there is a noticeable difference between Island Chris and World Tour Chris. The other thing that sets Island and World Tour apart is how the antagonist is played out. In Island, Heather is much more upfront about her agenda and has no problem putting everything out in the open. With World Tour, on the other hand, Alejandro is all behind the scenes with his strategic strategy, and it felt much more versatile. It's almost like they're complete opposites, but at the same time quite similar. So when asking who's the better villain, I gotta give the crown to Alejandro. He's much more strategic, much more level-headed, and is more behind the scenes. Now, it's not to say Heather is a poor strategist or anything. She definitely has her strategic moments, such as when she got Eva eliminated, for example, but from time to time again, she's left herself at a total disadvantage by letting people know she's a monster, what she's done, and only surviving just based off dumb luck, as I've mentioned prior with Justin's elimination or Beth's. Finally, with the challenges, this one is pretty tough to decide. Between World Tour's creativity and Island simplicity, in the end I'm going to have to go with World Tour. Seeing a new setting with every new place in the world they went to just makes it much more fresh in my opinion. Alright, I think I've gone over pretty much everything, so time to answer the million-dollar question. What's better, Island or World Tour? It's really tricky because both seasons are incredible and have things that the other season doesn't, so I'm not fully confident with my answer. Which, gun to my head, I'm going to have to give the W to World Tour. Like I said, it's definitely not a flawless season by any means. Sierra was definitely off the charts annoying. Having 3 teams didn't feel much of anything because Team Victory constantly lost, and don't even get me started on the love triangle. Island isn't a perfect season either, with most of the cast fighting for screen time, and Katie and Sadie made Kool-Aid come out of my ears anytime they were on screen, and having it be everyone versus Heather coupled with Heather's dumb luck made it a drag at times, so by no means does either season have a perfect run. I just think World Tour is just a smidge better. Overall, both seasons are at the top of the game, and it's likely to stay that way. Alright viewers, we've reached the end of our list. Be sure to let me know down in the comments what season you think is better and why. I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It really helps me out a ton. And yeah, with all that said, I look forward to seeing you with our next list.